This module looks at the use of variables in computer programming. A variable is something that can contain information and can change throughout the life of a program. Variables are used in programs so that values can be represented with meaningful names. So for example, when a variable named length is used in a program, it is clear that its value is a distance. Variables should be used to represent values because they make code easier to read, understand, and modify. Each variable represents a specific memory location where the information can be stored. Variables in programming are very similar to variables in mathematics. The difference is that variables can be different types depending on the type of value to be stored. There are three parts to a variable. A variable is like a box in a computer's memory. The type of the variable is like the shape of the box. So we can have different shapes that represent different types. We can have a square box or a rectangle, and we can also have a circle representing two different types of variables. So maybe the box represents a variable that would be a type string. And a string is a variable that can contain letters, numbers, but some length of or value of letters and numbers put together. Whereas the circle maybe is going to represent an int, which would be a number value that has no numbers after the decimal place. Okay, and then we can also put labels on our boxes. These are known as the identifiers. So a label on my first box, if I'm looking to store some information, maybe I'm looking to store a person's name. Okay, that would be the label on the box or the identifier for the variable. For the circle, if I'm looking for an int, maybe I'm looking for someone's age. That's the identifier for that variable. The last part of the variable would be the value. So that's what I'm actually putting in that memory location or putting it inside that box. When you first start with a variable, there's nothing inside that box. So I can set a value to be something that is going to go inside that box. The value I'm going to store inside my name box might be someone's name, such as Cole. And I'm going to store his age in the age box, which is 32. Before we can use our variables, we have to declare them, which is a way of setting up a space in the memory to store that information. We need to set up the type, and we need to set up the identifier. When declaring variables, we start with the type, and then we include the name or the identifier afterwards, and end with a semicolon. So as an example, I can set up a variable that has a type int, all in lowercase, and an identifier with the name length, and then end with a semicolon. So here, int is my type, and length is my identifier. The identifier should be descriptive, and the identifier length here tells us the variable will store a measurement, but the identifiers such as rectangle length tells us even more information about the variable itself and what it's going to store. Some conventions you should be using for the identifier are the name of the variables. They must be descriptive, so the variable should represent what is to be stored. So as an example, x is not descriptive, whereas treex tells the programmer what the variable is representing. Camelcase, which is very important, which tells you how to split up words in a variable name without using underscores. So we do this for variables. The first word is going to be lowercase, while each word after that starts with an uppercase letter to show a separation between the words. So as an example, like my favorite game. Okay, the first word is lowercase, while every word after that starts with an uppercase letter. There are very specific rules for naming variables. So some things that you must do is you must start with a letter. It can consist of any letter. You can have underscores, but in our case we are going to be using Camelcase so that you're separating the words that way. They must be unique, so they're not used elsewhere. So you cannot use specific words that are already included in the Java dictionary, and you're not using the same identifiers for different variables, which is why we try to make them as descriptive as possible. It allows us, gives us more flexibility when we're coding, gives the programmer a much better idea of what is actually being stored. Do not start with a number. Do not put spaces. Don't include special characters, and I also talked about not including any word that's used in the Java dictionary.